The multiverse was a concept born from practicality in the comic book medium. The multiverse stretches its origins back to more fun comics 101 from 1945 with the introduction of the spin-off Superman stories in Adventure Comics known as Superboy, which was Clark Kent when he was a kid. The only problem is, in the original timeline, Clark never became Superman in Smallville, becoming Superman when he hit Metropolis later on. But the book proved popular and silently introduced the first reboot of the DC timeline. Superboy became part of Superman's origin, and thus it retconned what came before. Add in new heroes like Barry Allen's Flash and Hal Jordan's Green Lantern, replacing their Golden Age counterparts with no reference to those characters leaving, and you kind of end up with a pickle, especially because by this point in the 1960s, continuity and crossovers became more important. Enter The Flash 123, which introduced the Flash Barry Allen to the Flash Jay Garrick, Barry living on Earth 1 and Jay living on Earth 2. Effectively shifting the modern at the time DC characters to Earth 1 with the old characters on Earth 2, along with the old Superman that became Superman as an adult, meaning any of the Superboy issues starting in 1945 and beyond took place in Earth 1 while Superman lingered on Earth 2 for a while before at some point being rebooted, but exactly when is up to debate. This was a functional story, and with Justice League of America 29 adding in Earth 3, where all the heroes were evil and all of the villains were good, we saw our first gimmick multiverse story. This created two camps in the comic book multiverse story. The first, a functional multiverse story, and the second, the gimmick multiverse story. Neither are inherently bad, mind you, but what we have seen in film and television so far is primarily the latter, the gimmick multiverse story. Spider-Man No Way Home, for example, which is a movie I mostly enjoy, used the multiverse to bring back two of the former Spider-Man actors through Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire. Not all that dissimilar from Flash 123 in its own way. Deadpool 3 was undeniably a gimmicky multiverse story with numerous Marvel actors from across various studios and timelines coming together. Even the Flash movie saw the return of pretty much every DC actor you could imagine. Peacemaker Season 2, in my opinion, sets out to be the first major production in superhero film to do a story for the multiverse that's entirely functional to the story. And I think it does a pretty good one at that, with some issues. But I think it did a pretty good job to push Peacemaker's arc forward a bit and answer some new questions that have come up since the reboot from the DCEU to the DCU. Peacemaker Season 1 concluded in 2022 and was the first and only show in the DCEU. Since then, the DCEU was rebooted into the modern DCU. But since the architect of the DCU, James Gunn, was also in charge of this season, the decision was made that Peacemaker and the 11th Street Kids would continue their adventures in the DCU. This to the chagrin of many fans, predominantly Zack Snyder fans, but of course some fans were just confused how that would work, and honestly, it's a valid question on how they were exactly going to pull a show that had a decent few things connecting it to the DCEU and to the DCU cleanly, since you couldn't just do a one-for-one pullover and never mention it. I mean, we even had a cameo from Zack Snyder's Justice League, something that wouldn't really work in this universe as established in the Superman film. This season was planned and announced in 2022 with James Gunn set to write and direct the whole thing, though of course as creating the new retooled universe became his priority, that was no longer possible as it once was, which led to directorial help from Greg Mottola, director of Superbad, Peter Sollett, who is a fairly prominent streaming director, and Athea Jones, who has directed many streaming shows as well as working on Evil with Peter Sollett. James Gunn directing the premiere and finale as he was simultaneously directing Superman at the same time. The show was originally set to come after the planned Waller TV show, but following the 2023 Hollywood union strikes, a shakeup happened with Waller put on an indefinite hold. Okay, so this show obviously had the problem of being set in a new continuity, and some things were pulled over and some things were dropped. James Gunn going on record and saying he rewatched the first season of the show to basically decide what he would want to pull over and what would be retconned. Starting with the Suicide Squad, we have things like Rick Flagg's death and the approximate events of Corto Maltese from that film, though who was all there and who wasn't besides Peacemaker and Rick Flag is unknown. It's fairly vague, but it did happen in some capacity. Additionally, we know from a flashback this new DCEU's Rick Flag was dating Enchantress, something that was set up in the 2016 Suicide Squad movie by David Ayer, which adds a bit of confusion as we don't yet know how canon that film will be. But judging on the fact that it felt so lightly important to James Gunn's 2021 soft reboot of Suicide Squad, I'm guessing not much going forward. Peacemaker Season 1 is almost entirely canon, but with some changes. Certain references from the show, like mentions of Green Arrow or Batmite, are subject to be retconned, according to James Gunn, assuming they don't fit in with the universe. We also see a recap with Zack Snyder's Justice League being replaced with the Justice Gang, Superman, and Supergirl.
You're late, you fucking dickheads! Go fuck another fish, asshole! You're late, you fucking dickheads!
What a meathead.
Screw that guy.
Other than that, though, Season 1 happened as it was shown originally. The character arcs pull over, the people who died stayed dead, the survivors survived, you get the idea. My opinion on this, I will go ahead and just get it out of the way now. I really could care less. I loved the first season of Peacemaker and wanted more. If they just continued to set it in the DCEU and didn't have it have anything to do with the DCEU, I would have been fine with that. The fact that they want to connect it, I'm also fine with that. I really don't care that much. And honestly, as we kind of described with the Superboy Superman fiasco of the late 40s and early 50s, stuff like this got a little blurry all the time in the early comics, so this isn't the only example of something like this happening. It, along with the Suicide Squad, felt far enough away from Zack's stuff too, that I didn't think it would take too much to move over, and honestly, that is pretty well shown in the fact that the 3-minute Season 1 recap at the start pretty much covers what you need to know about what was rebooted. Everything else, as of now, is pretty much up to your imagination. It's not that tricky to follow, and I get if you're a continuity nut and get bothered, and I'm sure this will eventually lead to some minor continuity issues, but hopefully if you like the first season you can get past it or just pretend it's not connected to the DCU. I don't know what to tell you. I kind of compare it to like Disney's 2014 reboot of Star Wars and how the Clone Wars was pulled over despite tying into some no longer canon aspects of the original timeline. And over the years, Star Wars worked to iron out any confusion, so hopefully the DCU does the same as time goes on. Anyhow, on to the story. Peacemaker Season 2 takes place following the first season, with the group the 11th Street Kids more or less fractured, but still meeting up here and there. Peacemaker is starting to explore his father's quantum unfolding chamber from Season 1, finding an alternate version of his life that seems much better to him. Adebayo has gone through a divorce, and after exposing her mother, Amanda Waller's illegal activities, has gotten fired from her intelligence job, looking for a new grift. Amelia Harcourt is having a hard time finding an intelligence job following her allegiance with the 11th Street Kids and also being put on blacklist, while also going through a bit of a crisis, picking fights and just not really knowing what to do with herself anymore. John Economos is working at Argus under Rick Flag Sr. and wants nothing more than to keep out of trouble, while Vigilante lives with his mom in her basement still. Anyhow, Christopher Smith, or Peacemaker, is still a laughingstock, even after saving the world during the Butterfly Crisis. Being denied for a job with the Justice Gang, while also being tracked by Rick Flag Sr., who is investigating strange cosmic phenomenon coming from Chris's quantum unfolding chamber, and having an awkward relationship with Hardcore, who's being cold to him after a romantic night months earlier. Eventually, though, Chris enters into this alternate world and finds his dad and brother are alive, and they're a heroic trio that is greatly loved by the world. However, as he's exploring, he runs into himself from this other timeline and accidentally kills him. Chris flees back to his world at first, though after seeing the dysfunction in his life, returns again, catching Argus's attention as Chris does heroic stuff in this new world to much better acclaim, while also having a strong relationship with alternate Harcourt, and has a loving brother and father. Pretty much everything he's ever wanted in his head. Argus starts coming after Chris, a team comprising of Judo Master Sasha Bordeaux, Langstrom Fleury, Red St. Wild, and Eagle Hunter, and Rick Flag Sr. Eventually, the group pulls Harcourt in on the scheme, though she has a change of heart after setting up Peacemaker, something that lands him in jail and at the mercy of Rick Flag Sr., who starts torturing him. All this while Eagly learns he is the Prime Eagle, and mauls the Eagle Hunter, Red St. Wild, to death seemingly. After being let free, Peacemaker decides he's had enough and that he and Eagly would travel to the alternate dimension he found, which they do. This, however, reunites the 11th Street kids who go to the alternate world to try to find him, though they're followed by Judo Master. Hardcore finds Chris and hopes to bring him back as Vigilante meets himself of this dimension, and Economos is captured by the alternate world Augie, Peacemaker's dad, as Hardcore finds Peacemaker, and they realize this is a Nazi dimension.
Fuck me.
That was a little on the nose, but Adebayo is followed for being black. Judo Master of all people rescues Adebayo as Peacemaker and Hardcore escape, the group all making it back to the Smith mansion, though tensions grow with Augie and Keith, Peacemaker's brother, eventually leading to a showdown when the two vigilantes jump in half-cocked and kill Augie, not realizing this version of Augie is actually trying to solve this whole confusion and is less of an asshole than the main Augie we see in Season 1.
That I did the best that I could, and I left this world a better place than when I came.
This pisses off Keith because by now he learns that the real Chris, at least to him, is dead, and now he saw Augie die. The gang fighting him off and almost killing him as well, which makes Chris upset since it seems death follows him like a shroud. Anyhow, they spare Keith and make it back to the main universe with Argus waiting for them, arresting Chris and taking his dimensional rift device. A month passes between episodes, and now we see Argus is using this device to hunt around the multiverse, with Rick Flag Sr. outsourcing help from some of Lex Luthor's team to help him understand alternate worlds as they send Argus agents in as pawns to explore Chris's quantum unfolding chamber. This eventually gets Hardcore and Sasha Bordeaux seeing many of their colleagues recklessly get killed as Lex guys are messing around doing drugs and acting like assholes, and Rick Flag Sr. sits around not really caring about the cost of these reckless actions and bad orders. Chris is bailed out of jail and goes into hiding, eventually being found by Hardcore, who tells him she does care about him, and the duo start to date, with Adebayo starting a new private intelligence agency known as Checkmate, with help from Peacemaker, Hardcore, Vigilante, and John Economos, with some former Argus members, Judo Master, Langstrom Fleury, and Sasha Bordeaux joining up as well. And while the end seems optimistic, Peacemaker is snatched up at the end of the show by Flag, who sends him to a new dimension they found, during their human trials on the quantum unfolding chamber, an empty dimension known as Salvation.
This is for Ricky. You piece of shit.
Okay, so we talked about Peacemaker Season 1 previously, and though I would normally compare characters adapted to the comics, since this is a new universe, this is a kind of a weird case where the characters haven't really been changed for this new iteration, so doing it again for many of these characters feels a bit redundant. So I'll go over the few characters they added, and if you're interested in seeing how these characters compare to their comic counterparts, anyone I didn't mention here will be in my Season 1 video, linked on my end card coming up at the end of this video. Captain Triumph is Keith Smith, Chris's brother from an alternate universe. We see a young Keith in a flashback from the first season, but as he dies, when he and Chris were children, we never see him as a hero in that show. Here, Captain Triumph is his name, and he runs with the Blue Dragon, Augie Smith's identity in this world, and his brother Peacemaker, being pretty similar to Peacemaker, just a strong man with some cool gadgets. In the comic, Captain Triumph is pretty weird. He was created by Quality Comics, a publisher DC bought in the 1950s, which is interesting since Peacemaker was also a character invented by a different company, being made by Charleston, which also merged into DC about 20 years after Quality. Anyhow, Captain Triumph is weird, and the comics and show are not really similar except for the name and color scheme. I think the name was picked since this is a Nazi world and Triumph invokes things like Triumph of the Will, which is a famous Nazi propaganda film from 1935 that was a hugely influential film during Hitler's rise to power. Triumph as a word, I think, started to kind of evoke this strange Nazi feel, so I think that's why they picked it for him, though I may be reaching a bit, I don't know. In the comics, Captain Triumph premiered in Crack Comics 27 from 1943. His name was Lance Galliant, and after his brother Michael Galliant died due to an act of Nazi terrorism, they became merged, with Michael's spirit, I guess, kind of like haunting Lance, but in a nice way that gives him superpowers. This is done when he touches his T-shaped birthmark and merges with his brother's ghost. This honestly may be the most fuck-ass origin in the history of comics. And with alternate world Peacemaker dying and Keith surviving, I hope this concept is brought up in the future. Even if I find it a bit unlikely that an alternate universe Peacemaker haunts this universe's Captain Triumph in the new Superman 2. Sacha Bordeaux is an agent of Argus working with Rick Flag Sr. in this show, and is a cyborg working diligently and loyally under Flag, though this changes after their adventures in Chris's dimensional portal, with her turning her back on Argus. In the comics, she's Bruce Wayne's bodyguard briefly, who found out his identity and joins the Bat family for a while, eventually joining Checkmate and having a rocky relationship with Max Lord as he enacts his Brother Eye protocols. She first appeared in Detective Comics 751 and honestly hasn't ever been the most iconic hero, but had her time to shine occasionally during the Trial of Bruce Wayne comic arc and during the Checkmark and Omax stuff leading up to Infinite Crisis. That was actually it for new characters adapted. Others like Red St. Michael, who you would swear would be based on some kind of deep cut character, were simply made up for the show, which is something I respect. These are adaptations, so adapting is fine, but also making new shit is important as well. And DC's always been a company over Marvel, not afraid to build new characters out of the comics, key examples being Batman Beyond, Harley Quinn, Kryptonite was made up in the radio show. There's tons of examples. I could name like 5 or 6 more just from the Superman radio show alone. And I really like that James Gunn's picking up that tradition of trying to create new and interesting characters and ideas in the shows and films he produces. Peacemaker is our lead in this show, once again, and following the events of Peacemaker Season 1 is starting to feel underappreciated again, And while he loves hardcore, it's a love she won't reciprocate due to her tricky circumstances and being really down on herself. On top of that, the family he built in the 11th Street Kids isn't really panning out the way he hoped it would, following the conclusion of the butterfly crisis. It's hard to be friends with people as an adult. That's just how it goes, Peacemaker. Chris finds an alternate world where his dad and brother never died, and the group even holds something of a camaraderie. Something he and his father never had following Peacemaker accidentally killing his brother Keith as a child. Something that, well, it's not really his fault, he totally blames on himself. Chris heads to that other world in search of a better life. A life where hardcore loves him without the complexities of this world. And he can take the other Peacemaker's life where he's loved by his family and the general public at large. Another big problem rears its head with Rick Flag Sr., who hates him for what happened to Rick Flag Jr. during their time in Corto Maltese.
Peacemaker. What a joke.
Though eventually his new life falls apart, it being a house of glass built on the accidental death of his other universe counterpart. After Vigilante accidentally kills Augie, which, mind you, this Augie is much more compassionate than the Augie of the main universe, Keith now hates Peacemaker, and it leads to Peacemaker reflecting that where he goes, bodies follow.
I'm so fucking sorry.
You killed your brother, you piece of shit!
This is me.
First Keith from his childhood, then Rick Flag Jr., a man he killed when he was blindly following Amanda Waller's orders, a killing he deeply regrets, then his father, then himself, and now, yet again, his father. This causes Hardcore to realize his worth and give him a chance, though, of course, this comes crashing down as Rick Flag Sr. gets his ultimate revenge. Peacemaker is a conflicted character again, and while the arc is a little less direct, he's still a nice guy who's kind of an idiot and just wants to be shown respect and love, but can't get that due to his circumstances. He regrets what he's done and what he continues to do, but it's all he knows what to do. And this chosen family, while still alive, also feels to him to be falling apart in its own ways. Again, Peacemaker is alone, and when he finally finds peace again, he gets put in salvation, which is where we left him for now. Leota Adebayo is similarly having a crisis, trying to figure out who she is after outing her mother, Amanda Waller, who had her blacklisted, trying unsuccessfully to use her skills as a detective throughout the show, but also being the only one coping to a level that she can somewhat glue her 11th Street Kids family together, and being the only one who can translate the world for her strange friends, namely Vigilante and Peacemaker, in this season kind of acting as the straight man. Her relationship issues with Kia are also deepened. Again, the two are estranged, ultimately deciding the only way they can both be happy is apart, which climaxes in Adebayo founding the new intelligence agency Checkmate and bringing in her friends and other disenfranchised people who turned against Argus. I like her subplot, even if it's a bit fast here, and I think I could have had more time to cook. Adrian Chase, or Vigilante, still loves his best friend Peacemaker. Here we see he has a sizable amount of drugs and money he confiscated, and though he will murder criminals with reckless abandon, his moral code will not allow him to use this money, even though it'll help the gang do things like bail out Peacemaker when he was arrested. This eventually softens a bit, though. He is a prick to his mom and is still kind of incel man, playing Princess Peach's Showtime on the Switch to pass his time. He's still goofy, and it was fun when he met his alternate universe self, the only person we meet in that world that is virtually unchanged from his main version.
What's the best Pokemon?
Infernape. Yes!
Oh, what's the best thing to press your face against? Shag carpeting.
Yes!
But what's the worst thing to softly touch you? Human skin.
And the two Vigilantes gag was kind of a funny little thing they did while they were in the alternate universe. That said, while he has great moments with Adebayo, he really lacks good moments with Peacemaker, which is kind of his function in the first season, is being Peacemaker's friend before anyone else was, since they're both odd weirdos. And with the two not interacting as much here, Chase feels a bit on the back burner this season. Hardcore has no idea what to do with her life. All she knows is the spy game, and without it, she's lost, which leads her not really having time to process her feelings, or lack thereof, for Chris and getting in bar fights and stuff. At one point, she sells out Chris, but quickly works to help him during an initial struggle by Argus to capture him. Once she starts working with Argus to explore the quantum unfolding chamber, she starts seeing the bullshit in Argus. Rick Flag Sr. is driven exclusively by revenge. Lex Luthor's influence is oozing out of his weird cokehead lackeys that are working directly with Flag. And it's obvious that Argus isn't helping anyone but Flag and Lex. One new complication that we learn is that she had an affair with Rick Flag Jr. and even vows to help Rick Sr. make the person responsible, who at the time she didn't know was Peacemaker, pay. Something she doesn't end up doing. When she learns that Peacemaker is a good man who just wanted to do what he was convinced was right by Amanda Waller. And this ties into Peacemaker's arc of feeling guilty for the many bodies he left in his wake. She leaves with the rest of the gang to checkmate and ultimately gives Chris a chance, feeling a bit more complete after her adventure, though of course we kind of end on a cliffhanger with Chris in salvation. John Economos is kind of a coward who keeps doing Argus stuff despite knowing it's wrong, because it's all he knows. Though the whole time he helps Chris in little ways when possible, since he does like his friend despite his reluctance to admit it. He gains the courage to strike out with Checkmate. He is probably the least used of the 11th Street kids in this season, sadly, but his arc pushes him forward just a tiny bit when he leaves to go to Checkmate and gains some level of confidence. Rick Flag Sr. is our villain of sorts, and while we see him kind of back Superman in the Superman film and work well with his group of weirdos and creature commandos, he despises Peacemaker for killing his son during the Corto Maltese conflict. This leads him to roll back his thoughts on metahumans a bit and fight for things like salvation and working directly with supervillain Lex Luthor, even torturing Peacemaker, despite that being out of character for him since he just wants vengeance for his beloved son.
Motherfucker! Fuck you!
That boy was a better man you could ever dream of being.
I like this side of Rick. It's a complicated move since you can tell Rick Flag Sr. kind of had to break bad to get his desired revenge. And I think it's an important crux for this character who is clearly essential enough to have appeared in every DCEU project up to this point. We also got a fun, small guest starring role from Rick Flag Jr. in the alternate world at a point, and some new flashback material from Joel Kinnaman, who plays him, and is still great, and honestly, he's a cool character, so I like seeing him back. Rick Flag Sr.'s arc is sure to continue, and I'm looking forward to seeing more about him. Alternate world Augie Smith and Keith are a loving family to Chris. Augie seems to be more level-headed than his main Earth counterpart, though Keith remains pretty aggressive and brash following the revelation that his real brother was killed by main Chris on accident. I look forward to seeing more Keith, and I like the idea that this Earth had a more compassionate Augie, despite it being the racist Nazi version of the real world. I always kind of liked these mirror dimensions, and I found that to be slightly interesting. Langston Fleary is a bizarre comic relief character and a new member of Peacemaker's soft team after being an adversary during his time at Argus, but ultimately having a good moral code. He is a former suave party man turned kind of awkward old guy who is perverted, calls people weird nicknames, and has a debilitating case of bird blindness.
I have bird blindness. Bird blindness? I can't tell the difference between one type of bird and another.
Not too much to him, but Tim Meadows is amazing. He's such a funny comedian, and this might be the most funny character in this already goofy and over-the-top show, so I think he's a pretty great addition to the cast. Sasha Bordeaux starts as an asshole who wants Peacemaker dead, and while the show leads you to believe she's this heartless villain, she eventually leaves Argus, seeing her leader, Rick Flag, has went over the edge and seen her co-workers disposed of like trash with no compassion during her adventures in the quantum unfolding chamber. Where Lex's and Rick's guys are having them explore with no thought of the random and dangerous places they're being sent. I will admit Sasha changed a little fast. She felt like the secondary villain for a while, and then somewhat on a dime she switched. I think if it was supposed to be something where it was like looks can be deceiving and she realized, much like Hardcore, that perhaps everything isn't as it seems, then I would have been able to buy into it more. But as it stands, she just kind of decides to be a good guy at one point and feels slightly different as a character afterwards. I wish she just had more in the early show to kind of explain how she got to this point. Adebayo, being the MVP of befriending the weird characters, brings Judo Master into checkmate, who works with Rick Flag Sr. but eventually befriends Adebayo since the duo have a lot in common. Judo Master surprisingly joining the 11th Street Kids, despite being a fierce adversary in Season 1. With Judo Master not really approving of Rick's weird revenge rabbit hole and growing to like Adebayo. Red St. Wild may or may not have died, but he is an eagle hunter with a comically large gun, played by James Gunn regular Michael Rutger, who played Savant in Suicide Squad but got recasted when entering this new world, similarly to how Nathan Fillion was recast from Detachable Limb Kid from Suicide Squad to become Guy Gardner, and Sean Gunn took on Weasel and Max Lord, both of whom have actually been in the DCEU though. Red St. Wild proves to be important to Eagle E's story, who in this season learns he's the prime eagle, who is kind of the ultimate god of eagles, who can call more eagles to back him up. It's a really weird gag arc, but honestly it's pretty fun. I liked it. The Justice Gang shows up with Max Lord and bickers and acts douchey while interviewing Peacemaker for his entrance to the Justice Gang.
I've always said I cherish peace with all my heart, no matter how many people I need to kill to get it.
How many more of these do we have today?
The West Coast has been a wash.
Excuse me?
This guy sucks.
Excuse me?
It's funny, but also shows that this isn't exactly our noble Justice League who come together sheerly for the greater good that we know from the comics, and I kind of like these growing pains so far. I'm wondering where they'll go with them in the future. Lex Luthor briefly shows up and lends his expertise and some of his guys to Rick Flag Sr. to investigate the quantum unfolding chamber, since he has some experience with other dimensions, as we saw in Superman earlier this year. This doesn't push him a bunch, but clearly adds some stuff to his arc. This show's tone is that of a dark comedy like the first season. Dark stuff happens and crappy things are happening to our leads, but you still undercut that with jokes, a lot of which are admittedly pretty funny.
Dave was way cooler when he was a dishwasher back when we were friends.
We were never friends.
Then why did I go to your wedding?
Because you showed up fucking uninvited, Adrian.
I say undercut, but I actually think it strikes a good balance. It again uses humor in weird situations to kind of allow for some jokes to ease the tension on the show a bit, and I think the tone works well overall. The music again is a jukebox style music choice, using various rock ballads such as the new title track Oh Lord, a rock ballad from Foxy Shazam that takes over the intro from Do You Really Want to Taste It by Wigwam in the first season. This is kind of James Gunn's style, as we know. He likes to basically recommend his Spotify playlist over adding a score typically, despite Superman perhaps correctly for that character mostly relying on score. This show uses a bunch of random rock songs, which fits the Peacemaker show well and mostly works. Like most of these James Gunn soundtracks, there's some pretty good bangers in this one, but I think the first season generally had a better soundtrack. Greg Featherman and Fred Raskin return to do much of the editing, and again, it does a good job of integrating the plot and fight scenes, and keeps a quick and interesting pace. In a way, I think the pace is a little too quick, though. The show kind of coming to a quick conclusion and not having as many character moments from certain folks like Vigilante as I may have liked, and I think Adebayo's arc is so important and yet felt a little short for me. I think this largely comes down to the editing and the fact that this show leans more heavily on Peacemaker than the first season, which I thought was a much more integrated ensemble piece. Scott McCurdy returns and Scott Peck joins the crew as cinematographers, and it looks nice throughout, though it's not remarkable. It lacks any really crazy shots, but it does well enough, and things like the action scenes and gore effects are pretty well done. It works, but I won't lie and act like this is some magnificent cinematography. I definitely think they could have done some more creative things with it. This show is heartfelt, dark, and goofy just like Season 1, but unlike Season 1, it doesn't perfectly balance everything end to end in my opinion. The characters are pulled over wonderfully. Peacemaker is still the old, weird, funny, sad goober with a good heart, and everyone else is great too. But this show has a shocking amount of nudity and violence and is certainly much darker than, say, Superman, and this show feels sort of integral to the overall lore of the DCEU. This season has strong arcs and push the characters forward, but there are important lore ramifications, and I'm concerned that in the future, the R-rated projects, animated projects, and all-ages films might overmingle and get confusing. It's a problem we saw in the MCU with films like The Marvels that featured important lore for WandaVision, Miss Marvel, and Secret Invasion, with little context for people who didn't get into those shows. Hell, I make detailed videos and I never watched Miss Marvel or Secret Invasion, and some shit in the Marvels was really confusing. Why the hell was Nick Fury in space? I fear we may see the same problem here if Gunn doesn't tread carefully, and stuff will need to be recapped or not overly important. But the kind of contradiction is that this show ends fairly abruptly, with a lot of loose ends remaining open, and stuff with people like Rick Flag and Lex Luthor are left open, likely to be expanded in the next Superman film. I have a lot of faith in James Gunn, but this is going to be a tricky balancing act to work with that I think we already have seen the competition struggle with, while they're much further along with the TV show movie integration that the DCEU is with this only beginning. I also think while we had a lot of great character moments from each lead and the new additions as well, we really lacked some of the tight ensemble stuff, which I think was such an important thing that really worked in Season 1's favor. It wasn't till the episode where they all switched over to find Chris on the alternate world that they came together, and we just didn't get enough character moments there in my opinion, and they pretty much immediately split up when they got there. That said, the Checkmate establishment promises a lot on that front, and Rick Flag Sr. continuing down his revenge quest and kind of breaking his morals promises some great character moments in our future with him. I like this season, but I think these kind of key areas that it lacks and makes it fall far short of the first season, which I think was basically a masterclass in making a good redemption story with engaging action and a tight ensemble that constantly had great character moments and was utterly hilarious. This season kind of feels like a shell of that, even if it's not terrible. Peacemaker Season 2 got 95% on Rotten Tomatoes and a really solid 78 out of 100 on Metacritic. James Gunn has more or less ruled out a third season of Peacemaker for now, but says he will return in other forms, and it seems he wants to make Peacemaker a viable DC property as a bit of a pet project. So we are perhaps in for a film follow-up or something, but for now, we know the arc is tipping in the way of continuation of some kind in Man of Tomorrow, as we learn more about what Lex gets out of his bargain with Rick Flag Sr. I'm not sure that integration is a mistake or not, though. As I said, this show is pretty hard R, and I worry switching him from a television character to a film character may be a hard sell unless they maintain that hard R-rated tone with his next appearance. Only time will tell at this point, but the show left off with obvious big plans for Peacemaker and his allies at Checkmate, and I look forward to seeing what they come up with in the coming years for Peacemaker.